Hello class, I'm Dr. Jensen. I'm in the biology department and I run a research lab based on evolution, education, and reconciliation with religion. So I'm going to present to you a little bit of the work that we've done in the process of learning about how best to help students overcome the barriers to learning evolution when it comes to their religious faith. So here we go. Okay, so the objectives of our work is to, number one, help students understand the principles of evolution and to use them to solve complex problems. So we do care deeply about how much students understand evolution. But our second objective is to help students accept evolution as a valid scientific theory so that they will apply it in their daily decisions. And then third is to offer them a way to reconcile the scientific knowledge with their religious beliefs so that they don't lose their faith. So let's talk first about what it means to understand versus accept, because those are very different things. Understand means that you're aware of the principles, you understand how evolution works, you could regurgitate it on a test, but it doesn't necessarily believe that you apply it in your daily life. Whereas accepting means that you really recognize it as the most valid and correct explanation, and so you're likely to use it in your everyday life. Now, notice acceptance is not belief. We're not talking about a belief system here as we are in religion. We're talking about accepting it as truth. So, do our students understand evolution at BYU? Yeah. So our students perform in the 96th percentile on the ETS exam. That's the standardized nationwide exam. And on specifically population genetics and evolution, we're in the 99th percentile. So yes, our students do understand. But when it comes to acceptance, that's a whole other story. Okay, so I'm going to walk you through some of the data of LDS acceptance of evolutionary theory, or Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I'm just going to abbreviate in most places. And then we want to talk about how we help them accept. So I want you to think about it for just a minute. What factors do you think might influence acceptance? And which of those factors can we influence with our research? Okay, so just think for just a second. If you need to pause the video, you can. Okay, so here's the things that we're going to talk about. We'll talk about the current state of our population, and then we're going to talk about what affects acceptance rates. So what are the relationships between certain factors, other factors, and acceptance? How does religious affiliation affect acceptance? How does age affect acceptance? And time affect acceptance? And then we will talk about how we can change acceptance rates, because the answer to that question is yes, we can change acceptance rates using what we call a reconciliation approach, and we're going to extend it to some other populations and contexts as well. All right, so with that, here we go. So the state of LDS individuals on evolutionary theory. So these are some national and international polling of acceptance, and so on the left here you can see this is a bunch of different countries where they asked them about evolution, true being in blue, red being in false, tan being not sure, and you can see that United States falls second to lowest in the world on acceptance rates. And then if we look within the United States, this is a Pew poll from 2008. You can see the different religions and their acceptance rates. The average in the US is 48%, and here we are at 22%, just second to Jehovah's Witness. So there's definitely an issue here. It's definitely a salient issue that needs to be addressed, and that's why we run the research that we do. So this is, we did a reproduction of Pew Forum data. So this data is actually from 2008, and I'll show you the updated data soon. But in 2008, Pew ran a poll, Pew Forum ran a poll, and they asked about evolution. Is the statement, evolution is the best explanation for life on Earth? And what they found is in the US population, 48% of people agree with that statement and 45% of people disagree with that statement. And so we are pretty evenly split. And then they looked at it by religious denomination. So I'm showing you here Protestants, Catholics, and Mormons, or Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and Jewish individuals. So I want you to think for just a second before I show you our data where you think it is in comparison to Protestants, Catholics, and Jewish individuals. The orange being accept, the red being not accept. Okay, do you have a number in your mind? So here's where we fell. Pretty crazy, yeah? So we decided we wanted to know more about these people. And so, not these people specifically, but America. And so we sent out a nationwide poll, but we wanted to ask a lot more information about them. And so first, we did a Qualtrics survey. We had 724 individuals from across the country. We asked that they have answered affirmatively to one of the religious affiliations. So we chose Catholic, Jewish, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and Southern Baptist. And then we asked that half of the individuals be college age, so between the ages of 18 and 25, and the other half could be older. And this is what we found. Very similar, very, very similar to what we see in the poll that was done by the Pew Forum. And so we knew that we were dealing with the same kind of people, the same group of the population that has the same kind of acceptance rates, but we wanted to know a lot more about them. So we'll see some of that other data later. But there you go. That's where they are. What about human evolution? So interestingly, Gallup in 2014, so now we're 6 years later, they asked about human evolution, and they gave the respondents actually 2 questions. One is, do you believe humans evolved? And then 2, if you do, where do you fall? And this is the 3 options. Humans developed over millions of years from less advanced life forms, but God guided the process. That's this 31% here. Humans evolved, but God had no part in the process. That's 19%. And then God created humans in the last 10,000 years in their present form. And that's 42%. So 42% of the population is special creation. That's what we call that, special creationism, where we believe in a young earth and a literal translation of the Bible. So we asked our respondents as well in our Qualtrics survey, giving them the statement, evolution provides the best explanation for the origin of modern day humans. So we actually used the Pew statement rather than the Gallup statement. And here's what we see by religion. So Southern Baptists, obviously very low at 31%. Catholics are high at 74%. Jewish individuals are really high at 84% acceptance. Where are we? Okay, and again, I'm using Mormon because we published this paper long before the church came out and asked us to use a different name. So you'll see the name change as we go along. Okay, so where are we? Well, we're at 34%. So it is awfully low. We are right there with Southern Baptists. So here's some updated research. So the Pew Forum did some studies in 2013 and 2014. And in 2013, the general evolution acceptance was 60%, and special creation had dropped to 33%. And then by religion, they did it in 2014. And you can see here, it hasn't changed a whole lot. A little bit increased, though, because Mormons were down at 21% before, and they're now at 34%. So it has changed a bit in 6 years. And then in 2018, the Gallup decided to combine the 2 questions into 1 question. So instead of saying, do you believe that humans evolved? And then a lot of people said no, and then they offered them the options. This time they offered them all 3 options right up front. So of all of these, which do you believe? So the first 2 are humans evolved, one being God guided, one having God has no part in it. And then the third one is special creation. And if you give them the option right up front, it drops quite a bit. So we're really only about 18% of the population that's special creation, and a good chunk of the population that believes in what we call theistic evolution, where evolution is a tool that God used to bring about the creation. And that's 48%. So that was kind of encouraging. We still have a big chunk, though, 18%. That don't believe in evolution at all, or I shouldn't say believe, don't accept evolution at all. And so then one of the things we asked our survey participants is their knowledge of evolution. So we actually gave them an evolution exam to see, how they do on evolution in general, and it was on a 16-point scale, and you can see it's pretty abysmal. Nobody's getting more than 50% right, but our LDS population was the highest among all the religious groups as far as understanding evolution. So that was pretty neat to see. So then we wanted to know some of the relationships between these other factors and what's influencing acceptance. And so in order to understand these relationships, I need to give you a brief introduction to structural equation modeling, or SEM. Okay, so structural equation modeling is a way of analyzing instruments that are measuring latent variables. So latent variables are variables you can't directly measure. So things like height and weight you could directly measure, or number of legs or whatever, whereas a latent variable like anxiety or stress or even an understanding, where we use several survey items to try to get at this latent variable, that's what a latent variable is. So we're going to give you an example of grit. I don't know if any of you heard of grit, but grit is sort of your stick-to-itiveness. And so if we wanted to understand your grit, we would come up with several survey items that would indicate your grit. We call those indicators. So we might have 4 items on a survey that indicate your grit. We don't usually write those in the model, so you'll see that those are not in the models that I'm going to show you. We don't write the individual items, but just know that if it's in a circle, it means that we used individual survey items to understand that particular variable. And then we might have other variables that we think influence grit. So we might think that family support influences grit, or whether or not you have a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset, or how often you have experienced failure. And each of those, again, are in circles, so they had indicators that we used to measure that. And then we might want to know, how does all of this influence your success in school? And so this is how the model works. So you run the model and you get these directional arrows that we think family support, growth mindset, experiences with failure influence grit, and that in turn your grit will influence your success in school. And then we'll get these weightings that tell you, basically it's kind of like a correlation coefficient, right? So family support is a strong positive predictor of grit. Growth mindset is a strong positive predictor of grit, but experience with failure didn't turn out to be a significant predictor. And I'm just making this up, I have no idea. And that grit was a decent predictor of your success in school. Okay, so the asterisks are letting you know that it's a significant relationship, and then the number tells you kind of the strength of the relationship. Okay, so hopefully that made sense. You need to know that to look at these models. So, and then we also may find that there's some correlations between them. So it turns out in this particular model that I made up, that your growth mindset and your experience with failure are highly correlated. So the more failure you experience, the more likely you are to understand that you have your mind can grow. Okay, so with that, here's our first model. So this was looking at 3 measures of religiosity. So we looked at religious practice, which is, do you go to church, read your scriptures, that kind of thing. Religious influence is, how much does your religion influence what you eat, what you do, what you wear. And then religious hope is, how much does your religion influence your hope in life? Do you believe in miracles and an afterlife and that kind of thing? And first of all, no surprise, what we find is that there's a high correlation between all these factors, right? They're very highly correlated. And then we asked respondents about their creationist views. So these are things like the earth was created in a 24-hour period, or that organisms look the same today as they did in the past, and that kind of thing. And then we had a set of evolution statements, that the earth is old, that things evolved. And no surprise there, these are strongly negatively correlated, right? That if you have creationist views, you're less likely to accept evolution. And then you can see that religion is a very high predictor of positive predictor of creationist views and negative predictor of evolution acceptance. And some of the religions are slightly different, like religious hope in the Jewish population is a really strong predictor of creationist views, for example. And so what we see is that basically that religiosity is a significant positive predictor of creationist views and significant negative predictor of evolution acceptance. So then, this is a little complicated model. So then we came up with a bunch of other predictors that we thought might influence your evolution acceptance. And we actually measured, in this case, evolution acceptance in 3 ways. So human evolution, macroevolution, so do you believe in like big speciation changes, and then microevolution, which is the things that we always explain with like antibiotic resistance or viral mutations. And we call this instrument the predictive factors of evolution acceptance and reconciliation, or the FEAR with a silent P, because we love making up words. And so what we looked at was, number 1 was your science and religion conflict. So how much you felt that science and religion often conflict. And we see that that is a negative predictor of microevolution, but a positive predictor of macro and human. And we think this is because if you say there's a conflict, you're just out. You're not accepting anything. If you don't have a conflict, you're more likely to accept human evolution and macroevolution. This was general religious influence. So this is, how much does religion influence your everyday decisions in your everyday life? And this is a negative predictor of evolution acceptance. It doesn't have as much impact on microevolution. It was not statistically significant. Most people in our sample actually accept microevolution, but it definitely negatively predicts human evolution and macroevolution. And then this also is religious influence specifically on evolution is a negative predictor. And then we looked at scientific influence. So scientific influence on evolution and general scientific influence. How much does science influence the things that you do, the decisions that you make? And these are all very positive predictors of your acceptance of evolution. And then we had what we call covariates. So these are things you can actually measure with one item, like one thing. And so we see that public high school attendance increases your acceptance, how much your high school covered evolution increases your acceptance, And then your religions, if your affiliated religion accepts evolution, you're more likely to accept evolution, which makes sense. So we've got all these things that are at play in whether or not you accept evolution. And in fact, the research shows that understanding of the nature of science, so basically that scientific influence, is a strong predictor of your acceptance of evolution. Okay, so how do we help them? So one of the things is scientific reasoning ability. If it is sort of a reasoning thing, is your scientific reasoning ability influential? Now, this is different, though, than understanding the nature of science. This is saying your actual innate ability to reason scientifically. Is that a thing? And the reason we wanted to test this is because people like Richard Dawkins, for instance, who make the claim that anybody who does not accept evolution is somehow deficient. They're stupid, for lack of a better word. And we didn't think that was the case. And so we ran a structural equation model using scientific reasoning ability as a latent variable. And there's a bunch of test questions that we give that measures your scientific reasoning ability. So this one is looking at proportional reasoning, and this one is looking at identifying controlling variables. And so it's just a bunch of like science tests where there's no background knowledge, it's just whether you can reason through a problem. And we used that and we gave that to our respondents. Now, it was based on this was a paper done by Lawson and Worsnop in 1992. And they suggested that those with lower reasoning skills were most likely to have lower acceptance of evolution. But this was a path diagram, and it's not a very good way to analyze latent variables, so we argued that this was crap. And so we did our own. So this is our model, right? We've seen this before, that our 3 measures of religious practice are influential on creationist views and negatively influential on evolution acceptance. But then we added in scientific reasoning. So I've blocked out the relationships. I want you to just think about it for a second. Do you think that scientific reasoning has an influence on your religious practices, influence, and hope? And do you think it has an influence on creationist views and on evolution acceptance? So whether or not you can reason through scientific things. What do you think? So here we go. Turns out there's absolutely no relationship. There's no relationship between scientific reasoning and religiosity. There's no relationship between scientific reasoning and creationist views, and there's no relationship between scientific reasoning and evolution acceptance. This means that, well, 2 things. You can be very, very smart scientifically and reject evolution on the grounds of religion. And even more dangerous, I think, is that you can be really, really, dumb's not the right word, but not gifted in science thinking and totally accept evolution, right? So it's not a smart thing. It is a religious thing. It's a worldview issue. We also looked at how religious affiliation affects the acceptance of various components of evolutionary theory. And so these were our 4 categories: Southern Baptist, Mormon, Catholic, and Jewish. And what we see is that the pattern's always the same, that human evolution is the hardest to accept. Natural selection is next, but age of the earth, no one's really debating that the earth is old, and general evolutionary questions. So that was kind of interesting. So age of the earth seems to be less of an issue these days, but human evolution is certainly the most significant barrier. All right, so what about age of the participant? Does age somehow influence this? And so we looked at the current state. So remember, I told you half of our respondents were college age, half of our respondents were older. And so this is evolution is the best explanation for life on Earth. Remember, this is what the Pew Forum showed in 2008. Okay, and this is about when we took our data shortly thereafter. So here we have Southern Baptists, and we see that there is no difference between old and young. Catholics, there is no difference between old and young. Jewish individuals, there is a difference, with older Jewish people being more accepting than younger. And I've actually talked to several of my Jewish friends and colleagues, and they suggested there's a movement of orthodoxy in the Jewish religion that is causing them to reject science a little bit. So that was interesting. So how about us? What do we see in our population? I just want you to guess before I show you. Okay, so here's acceptance amongst the older individuals, 18%, younger individuals, 40%. So it is a huge difference. The younger generation is more accepting of evolution than the older generation. And we did the same thing with human evolution to see if there was a difference. And again, there's no difference in Southern Baptists or Catholics. The same difference is seen in Jewish individuals, with older individuals being more accepting of evolution, of human evolution. And then if we look at us, we see also a difference, but it doesn't reach statistical significance. So we still are having quite a bit of an issue with human evolution, and rightfully so. That is one of the most tricky topics that we talk about. Now we took we did also this data. So that, remember, that was a Qualtrics survey that was kind of across the country of non-BYU students. This one is specifically BYU students. So we pulled them at the beginning of their Bio 100 class in 2013. And it was a slightly different question. We took it from the MATE, which is an instrument that measures acceptance. And we said organisms existing today are the result of the evolutionary process that has occurred over millions of years. Okay, so we're going to sort of compare it to this evolution is the best explanation for life on Earth that we saw before. And in BYU students, what we see is a huge difference, right? Going from 40% acceptance to 80% acceptance. So what the heck is going on at BYU? But this is, again, at the beginning of a non-majors intro biology class. So presumably these students have not had any evolution training at BYU. But they are coming in higher, which is interesting. And then we ask them at the end of our Bio 100 class, and this is human evolution. And we see quite a bit of a change also with higher evolution acceptance. So let's talk about the youth of the church and see what is going on over this 30-year interval. So I actually have some data that Dr. Bradshaw, who is an emeritus faculty, he came to me several years ago with this data that he had collected 30 years ago and said, are you interested in this data? And of course I was salivating and said, oh my gosh, of course I'm interested in this data. Let's run the study again. So we did a snapshot 30 years ago and then a snapshot today to see what's going on with the youth. So the first thing we did was gave the students essays at the beginning of an introductory non-majors biology class. So presumably this is their first exposure to evolution in a college setting. And so the first cohort's from 1987 to 1996, so 20 to 30 years ago, and he had over 8,000 students. And then we did a cohort from 2014 to 2016 of nearly 800 students. And this is what we see. We thematically coded the essays to see what kinds of things they were saying. So when they go from most accepting on the right to least accepting on the left, so we've got full acceptance here, acceptance of everything but humans, adaptation only, equivocal, not important, all the way down to how dare you even ask me, that's so offensive. And you can see the numbers have changed dramatically over the course of 30 years. And so if you look at acceptance, what we called full acceptance here, and this is what we call loose acceptance, we're going from 12% full acceptance to 38%, and then 36% to 65%, at least partial acceptance 30 years later. So there is definitely something going on, and I wanted to share with you a couple of the thoughts of the students. So this is an essay taken from 30 years ago and then an essay taken from now. And these are very typical of the essays we saw. So I'll read them to you. Excuse me, from 30 years ago. The first thoughts of this theory brings to my mind provoke a feeling of disgust and disagreement. This belief upsets me a great deal because of the passage in Genesis that states that God made man in his own image, and thus we are not some creature empirically derived from simple life forms through time. Evolution is nothing more to me than a thoughtless idea created to explain how man came to be. Evolution makes me frustrated and upset. It has no direct application to today's world. And this is what we're seeing today. I recognize the evolution of species all around me. I can clearly see the resemblance between primates and humans. We are so alike. We look, think, reason, and even feel in similar ways. Evolution makes sense to me. I know that God is the creator. I know that the account of the creation is true. It does not make sense to me that humans are a coincidence that happened by some chance of evolution. My source for this belief is different than that for evolution. Now the trouble, or the unknown, comes when I try to combine both of these truths. Archaeology, archaeological, geological, and any other logical evidence one may find doesn't disprove the scriptural accounts. Frankly, I've thought of how to combine them and how to make them work together and have gotten almost nowhere, or at least not anywhere that makes sense to me. So you can see that today they're seeing the evidence is compelling, and they're just struggling with how to bring it together with their faith. They've never been offered a solution to that. So we also looked at a couple other things to figure out what kinds of things might be influencing this 30-year longitudinal change. So we wondered if it was better high school preparation. We wondered if it was less negative messaging by church authorities, whether their views towards science were changing, or if there's something unique to BYU. And so better high school preparation. We actually asked, I just showed you the answer. We actually asked them how much biology was covered in their high schools. And I'll just show you. So you can see that at least at least 90-ish% are getting some kind of coverage, with 60% being sort of weak coverage. So maybe it's being covered a little more. We also asked them about their high school teacher's bias. When the high school teacher presented it, did they present it with skepticism, with religious conflict, as atheistic, or as neutral? So I want you to think for just a second, what do you think, based on your high school experience, what do you think happened to most of these kids? Okay, and this is what we see. Overwhelmingly, the majority of high school teachers presented it in a neutral light. So that was very exciting. So maybe it is being covered better in high school and with less contempt. And then we asked them their acceptance. Just remember back to high school, which for some of them was like a month ago. What was your acceptance coming out of high school? From no conflict to concern with validity, mild religious conflict, severe religious conflict, or neutrality. And this is what we see. A good third of them are neutral, a third of them have mild religious conflict, and then some of them are those other categories. So maybe we're having a little bit of influence with the high school preparation. The second thing we thought was maybe there was less negative messaging by church authorities. And so we asked them in their seminary, was evolution covered? And was it covered yes with opposition, yes with no position at all, yes as compatible, or something else? So I want you to think, based on your seminary experience, if you had a seminary experience, where would you fall on this category, on these categories? Okay, and this is what we see. Overwhelmingly, it's just not being taught. And if it is being taught, it's being taught as compatible. So that was really kind of great. The other thing we asked them is if they had heard a negative statement about evolution directly over the pulpit. And this has changed dramatically in 30 years. And so our students overwhelmingly have not heard anything. And the last time I heard anything negative about evolution was around 2011. So these youth are beyond that, excuse me, and are not hearing negative messaging. So this could very well be contributing to this change. Oh, and then we also asked them if they were aware of the BYU evolution packet. I should ask you guys, are you aware of the BYU evolution packet? It's just a packet compiling the first presidency statements on evolution. And overwhelmingly, no, they'd not heard of that. And so we provided for them. And I just want to point out on this next one. So one of the hypotheses we had was that the views towards science are changing in the church or amongst the youth. And I want to point out, though, that our church has always been positive towards science. So even from Joseph Smith, one of the grand fundamental principles of Mormonism is to receive truth, let it come from which it may. First presidency in 1910, our religion is not hostile to real science. That which was demonstrated we accept with joy. And then this great quote in 2015, this is President Nelson, there's no conflict between science and religion. Conflict only arises from an incomplete knowledge of either science or religion or both. This university is committed to search for truth and teach the truth. All truth is part of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Whether truth comes from a scientific laboratory or by revelation from the Lord, it is compatible. So that was really a great statement. So I wanted to point out that our church has never been anti-science, and it should not have changed. But we wondered about the youth. So we asked them some different scientific questions to see if they were very scientifically minded. So one of the things is, do you think that we should teach intelligent design in school, which is clearly a non-scientific theory? So I want you to just say where you would be on this, and I'll show you where they are. So 40% approve, very few disapprove, and most have no opinion. So that was kind of disconcerting. And then we asked them about climate change. Is it real and human caused, or there's no valid data that exists, or I have no opinion? And this is where they fall. So they're much more scientifically minded when it comes to climate change. And then we asked them about avoiding vaccinations. So the question was, should parents be able to avoid vaccinations of their children? So if you agree, you're saying we should avoid vaccinations. And they overwhelmingly disagree with that. So really what turns out for science, it just depends. Depends on what you're talking about, how scientific the students are. So that didn't give us much help there. Oh, we also asked them about science-religion conflict. So this is 30 years ago. We asked them, the statement was science and religion are in conflict. And 40% of students thought that was true. Whereas today, we have only 10% or 12% of the students that think that. And then the other one was scientists cannot be religious. 40% of students thought that was true 30 years ago, and we still have 30% of students who believe that today. This one was a little worrisome, given that I'm a scientist. And so that was a little bit crazy that we're still thinking that we can't be a scientist and be religious. So the last hypothesis was that there's something interesting about BYU, and it turns out of our participants in the survey, In our Bio 100 classes, 72% of them had a parent that attended BYU 20 to 30 years ago and were likely in the cohort that we sampled then. And so that gave us the idea that, it's probably an influential factor that the students 30 years ago were getting trained in evolution, and then they're passing it on to their children. And so I want to show you a couple of interventions that are happening at BYU, and I'm going to show you the 30-year essays as well. So this one is just a quick and dirty little experiment we did where we just threw it into a classroom. We looked at just a couple classrooms and whether we can change acceptance over the course of a semester. And it turns out we can, better than if we don't do our intervention. And I'll talk about what that intervention is later. But here's the post essays. So we looked again at this same cohort, the over 8,000 from 30 years ago and 700 from today, and we looked at their post essays. So after they've been through the Bio 100 where we do our intervention, and you can see they were having this really great shift. So this was the pre-test, if you remember, and this is now our post-test. So this goes again from least amount of change to most amount of change. And this new category showed up in just this cohort that I got evidence to support what I already previously believed. And so this is full acceptance, humans included. This is loose acceptance. And we see that we've gone from 38% at the post to 61% of full acceptance and 57 to 82%, 82.5% of full acceptance. So we do believe that what we're doing in the classroom is really having an influence. We also wondered if what we do in the classroom would work in other populations. And so we actually extended this reconciliation model to 3 other schools. So this, we gathered BYU data again. This is Point Loma Nazarene University, they're Nazarene. This is Colorado Christian University, they're a mix of evangelical Reformed religions, Christian religions. And then this is Evangel, which are Pentecostal. And we gave them the essays at the beginning. And this is what we see. So this is full acceptance in the brown bar. The red bar is limited acceptance, where maybe they don't believe in human evolution, or they only accept microevolution, not macroevolution. And so you can see where the numbers are. Look at Evangel, it's very low, very, very, very low. And then we did the reconciliation model in the classroom, and we did their essays at the end. And you can see at every single location, we are increasing acceptance, sometimes very dramatically. Look at Evangel, right? Now it's partial acceptance. They still had a hard time with human evolution, but we've got almost all but 8% that are accepting. So it does work in other religions as well. We also did it in a theology class. So not just in a biology class, but in a theology class. We did this at Point Loma Nazarene. And what we see is the gene is a measure of acceptance. So biology, we increase acceptance, but also in theology, we increase acceptance. And then we also looked at their change in religiosity to make sure we weren't damaging their religious faith by teaching them about evolution. And you can see in both cases it goes up, and significantly so in theology. So it's actually strengthening their testimony over the course of the semester. So that was really exciting. We also tried it amongst science and seminary. So we actually invited, when Dr. John Hawks, who was the co-discoverer of Homo naledi, he came to BYU and gave a seminar, and we also recruited him to do a faculty professional development. So you can see him here in this room. We had high school teachers from the local junior highs and high schools that teach biology. And then we also invited the seminary teachers from the corresponding schools to come and visit with their colleagues and to learn about reconciliation. We also invited a group of BYU faculty from the religion department. And we had this whole discussion about reconciliation, and then John Hawks presented this awesome workshop on human evolution. And so one of the things we measured was their awareness of conflict. So we asked the teachers whether they thought their students felt conflict. I'm sorry, this is not their students, this is them. Do they perceive conflict between evolution and religion? And the biology teachers have relatively little conflict. The seminary teachers experienced the most conflict, and religious faculty had less conflict. So that was interesting. And then we asked them about the church's position. So the majority of the people there were Latter-day Saints, and if they weren't, they're very familiar with our church because they teach here in Utah. So we asked them what the church's position on evolution is, which, if you know, it's neutral, right? There is no position of the church on evolution. And secondary biology teachers at the beginning, about 70% of them knew that. Seminary teachers was a little lower, but religious faculty, 100% of them knew that, and they stayed at 100%. But just by doing this quick evening, we were able to get our teachers up to 100% or nearly there with understanding what the church's position was on evolution. But interestingly, even given this, and you notice the religious faculty are the highest in understanding that the church is neutral, we asked them if they had a personal conflict between evolution and religion. So high numbers would indicate no conflict, and low numbers would indicate serious conflict. So even though the religious faculty had the best understanding of the church's neutral position, they also experienced the most personal conflict, followed by seminary teachers, and then biology teachers have relatively little conflict. And then this is, we walked them through reconciliation. So this is their pre-test versus their post-test. And we gave them the options, right, of naturalistic evolution, which is God has no involvement, theistic evolution, where God guided evolution, and then young earth creationism. And you can see that the biology teachers, nobody was a young earth creationist. The majority are God guided, and that pretty much stayed consistent. Seminary teachers, however, we had about 62.5% that were young earth creationists at the beginning of our seminar, and 3 hours later had changed to God guided, which was really exciting. And 50% of our biology or religious faculty from BYU were young earth creation, and we dropped that number down to 25%. So it works even in a short setting outside of a classroom. And then we also tried it at a museum, an aquarium in Idaho. And so we asked, we recruited people doing a live animal show, and we did a little reconciliation lesson on how science and religion don't necessarily have to conflict, and we talked about evolution. And then we asked the respondents pre and post this little 15-minute show how their beliefs were. So we broke it up into acceptance, belief, and we used the word belief to see what they were thinking about that, and then open to, like I'm willing to think about it. And we used adaptation, which is microevolution, speciation, which is macroevolution, and then human evolution. So the bars in green are the number of people who positively changed their views after a 15-minute presentation. You can see the majority had no change from pre to post, and most were accepting. A couple people were turned off by the presentation. But for the majority of people, we had good amounts of people who changed their minds based on a very short presentation. So that was promising as well. So here it comes down to it. What are we actually doing? So you can find more information about this on our website, recoevo.byu.edu. So we're going to talk about what we're doing in the classroom. So the approach is, I want to first highlight the approaches that have been used in the past. So the deficit model is the idea that if you don't accept evolution, you're somehow deficient. You're not as smart as other people. And so this is kind of the Richard Dawkins idea. This doesn't work, right? It drives people away. The resolution model is one that, at least this is what I experienced in undergraduate and graduate school. And this was to, set up the evidence for both creation and evolution, and then hope to resolve to evolution being more convincing than the religious aspect. And that also is not super effective. And so we've created a new model we call the reconciliation model to cause things to coexist in harmony. So we're not saying we're going to set them up opposite each other. We're saying, hey, let's look at the best of both of these and put them together. And so how do we do that? So this is our approach. We acknowledge that there is a conflict using cultural competence. I'm going to show you each of these individually. We address the difference between science and religion. We address creation from a religious standpoint. We address modern revelation. We explain the cultural history and the reasons why they might feel conflict, and then we offer ways to reconcile. So first, acknowledging the existence of conflict using cultural competence. So it turns out that 89% of the U.S. population are believers, are theistic individuals. 25% of biologists are, and 10% of evolutionary biologists are. So there's clearly a cultural conflict between those who teach it and those who are receiving it in the classroom. And so it behooves us to figure out how to be competent in the way that we approach our students. And so we acknowledge with the students that there is a conflict, and we talk about it in a way that's not confrontational. We address the difference between science and religion. We talk about the types of questions that science answers, like how the earth was formed, when the earth was formed, how species came about, whereas religion is interested in answering questions like who and why, who was involved, why are we here, what's the purpose of all of this. And if we can sort of keep those separate in our mind, we can see that there are two ways of getting at truth. We address creation from a religious standpoint, so we talk about what the scriptures actually tell us, and then we talk about modern revelation. Now, obviously, if you're doing this in other religions, we don't go into specifics, but we do talk about Genesis and what is Genesis. So the books of the Bible are different genres, right? We have law type books, we have history type books, we have poetry, we have allegories, we have letters, we have prophecy. Not all of them were meant to be scientific historical texts. And so understanding that we don't need to take the Bible literally actually helps people a lot. We also explain the cultural history. Now, in the case of other religions, what we do is we talk about the creationist history in the United States, right? To give them an idea of what was going on in the country and why there is all this conflict. And then we encourage them to research their own religion's stance on evolution and look for ways that they could be compatible. We actually have quite a few resources from several different religions on our RecoEvo website. So if they're Protestant, if they're Pentecostal, if they're Catholic, they can go to the website and they can find information from their religious standpoint. Now, of course, here at BYU, we actually talk about our official stance on evolution. We talk about the official statements by the church that make it very clear that we are neutral in evolution. There's actually one from 2016 in the New Era that states it very clearly. And so we help them see that there is no conflict between it, that we are allowed, so to speak, to learn about this kind of thing. And then we offer them ways to reconcile evolution. We offer ways that the things can go together. We talk about this spectrum of non-scientific to scientific viewpoints, right? And so some of these things are clearly young Earth and clearly not supported by the scientific evidence, like flat Earth or universal model, young Earth creationism, and even intelligent design. And then we talk about things that are more compatible with science, depending on how you define them. So gap creationism is the idea that there were creative events that were separated by gaps. Day-age creationism is the idea that each day of creation was actually an era or an age. And then progressive creationism, where creation events have been happening all along. And these, it depends on how you define them, whether they are compatible with the scientific evidence. But theistic evolution, the idea that God used evolution as a tool, is completely compatible with the scientific evidence and with our faith. And agnostic evolution, so if you're talking about the most scientifically, the most that science can prove, so to speak, science is agnostic, right? Science can't make any predictions or gather any evidence for or against God, right? So that's why I've boxed out atheistic evolution. A lot of people put atheistic evolution down here as scientifically compatible. It is just as scientifically compatible as theistic evolution. You are invoking a belief system above that which science can show. So science is agnostic, and that's it. Whether you believe that there is a God or you firmly believe that there isn't a God, that is a matter of faith, right? That is a matter of belief. As Francis Collins said just yesterday in his Templeton Award recognition, he said that the atheistic approach seems to be the least logical from a scientific standpoint, because you're invoking a belief system, right? And the same thing with theistic evolution, though. It is a belief system, but it is certainly not disproven by science. And so if students can keep that in mind, it makes it a lot easier to learn about science. That science isn't trying to say anything about your faith. It's just showing you the evidence of what happened on Earth, whether God did it or not, right? And of course, we firmly believe that God did it. And so I just want to show you this last little clip to finish up. Hopefully the volume will work here. Oh, just a moment. My bad. Just a second. Oops. Let's try again.
Okay, let's see you do what you do.
Am I allowed to go closer to you guys?
You can, yes.
All right, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Now, the thing about bar magic as opposed to regular magic is the fact that I don't use big props. I can't afford them. And that's all I have to dazzle the world.
Right.
Now, the thing about magic that happens close to your face is that it has to be performed exquisitely. If I can pronounce that word correctly, but...
Oh.
Excuse me.
Just coughed up cards.
But honestly, Whoa.
Oh.
Just do not like card tricks because,
That's amazing.
but,
Where are you coming from?
but I have a beautiful 6-year-old son, and I want to do something to you, Miss Mel B,
Oh, wow.
that my little boy likes. Can I see your hand? The other side. Thank you. Oh, perfect. I'm gonna take this ball, put it right about here. I want you to hold that ball real tight for me. Thank you. With that ball there and that ball there, we're gonna go abracadabra. Open up your hand.
Shut up! Shut up!
Let me mentally assault you two on the other hands. Because I am ghetto.
Oh. Wow. He's good. Oh, he's good.
That's good.
Whoa! Pretty cool.
Thank you. Not my name, though. That is the name.
Whoa!
Wowza.
Thank you.
Okay.
So why do I show you that? Well, it's magical, right? So when I first saw that clip, I just could not believe what he was doing. And the only logical explanation my mind could come up with was that he is honestly magical. He has magical powers, and there's no other way to explain it. But then as I thought about it more, I thought, you know what? He's not magical. There's a way that he's doing that, and really cool. I can find out, right? And I think about the creation the same way. Is it possible that God created everything poof out of magic all at once? Absolutely, and it's amazing and beautiful. But what I think is even more amazing is that he probably didn't. That there's a way that he did it, and that I can find out, which makes biology the study of magic. And with that, I just want to thank my collaborators on this project. I've got a lot of collaborators and a lot of funding sources. Hope you enjoyed that. Let me know if you have any questions. You can email me at jamie.jensen@byu.edu. Thanks, guys.